All right, guys, we are back on another live stream. We got the legendary Matthew Poes back. How's it going, Matt?
I've become a unicorn.
You have, man. And we got a double header from Haven Smart. We got Don and Sean. How you guys doing?
What's up?
What's up?
So we want to talk about the news that dropped last week about Auro 3D and their bankruptcy. And I asked Matt to kind of put together a slide presentation to talk about what this all means and just give our thoughts on the whole situation. Because as you guys know, I've been pretty critical about a format that doesn't have software. I mean, that's the bottom line. I was like this when SACD was out. I love SACD. I've probably got about 50 or 100 discs, but let's face it, it's a dead format. You can't have a format without software. And I put this little meme together as a joke. It's kind of like from the 80s. You get this, Don, right? Where's the beef?
Yeah.
Where's the software? And in the time that Auro has been out, you know, you got releases like this, Mondo Dio, which is like an obscure European band in Auro 3D. Almost
I listen to that every day.
Yeah, right. I listen to that every day. It's not like
they play that the Blue Oyster.
Yeah, you're not dropping the weekend with Auro 3D. You know, you're not licensing the surround technology to mainstream music or movies, especially in America, and that's a real big problem because you can't, in my opinion, you can't survive just on upmixing. And there seemed like there was a concerted effort like 6 months ago where all the YouTube influencers were just touting that.
Not all of them.
No, not all of them. A portion of them were upmixing and saying it's better than native content, and I'm like, have you watched Stranger Things and Atmos and telling me that downmixing that into 5.1 and then upmixing to Auro 3D is a better solution? You probably haven't seen good Atmos because let me tell you, Don, you've seen season 4 Stranger Things, right? So far, isn't that not the best Atmos mixing you've heard on a streaming show?
Atmos on it is killer.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and there's so many examples of that.
The only problem, Gene, with it's a little bright. It's just a little bit bright. A little bright.
It's a little bit bright.
Little tweak my ears a little bit.
Look, you know, I've done several videos, and we'll talk about this in the slide presentation on comparing upmixers, and there's pros and cons to each. But at the end of the day, we're talking about wanting software. And I don't want people to forget the fact that about a year and a half ago, when Dolby tried to restrict their surround upmixing, they didn't want to do cross mixing on receivers. So if you had a 5.1 signal, they didn't want you to upmix it to DTSX or Auro. I fought that, and I had everyone on our YouTube channel basically writing emails to Dolby and Sound United, and we got that lifted. We got that restriction lifted almost 2 years ago. So it's not like I'm anti-Auro or anti-DTS or anything. I'm just trying to keep things real. If you don't have software for a format can't exist. That's just the bottom line. Otherwise, it's just irrelevant. It's basically like based in the 70s when we had quad. You know, we had a handful of albums and people loved quad, but it just never survived. So I want to show what you did here, Matt, and you kind of could go through this for us.
Sure. For some reason, it's not formatting it right, but that's all right. Should be able to go through this. So yeah,
I can make the screen larger. Hold on.
It's still not fixing it. It's fine. Auro Technologies files for bankruptcy. Is this the end or the beginning? And so the reason we're saying that is when this first came out, I think Gene and I and Don, I won't speak for you, maybe you and Sean had a similar reaction. We kind of read the headlines and ignored the rest and was like, oh, I guess that's the end of Auro. That's not surprising. And then I read the article and there was actually a bit more to it. So Wilfred basically indicated that this, for him, is more of a strategic move than really just a sign of the end. So there was negotiations that were apparently ongoing with a strategic partner that fell through. I believe, if I recall correctly from the articles, that they were intending to buy Auro, or there was some sort of important partnership that was supposed to take place. And there were some targets for expansion that needed to happen. And it became clear that there would be no way for Auro to hit those targets in the current market. And so the whole thing fell through. And so they basically didn't have a way forward. They became insolvent. There was ongoing work.
How is bankruptcy a strategic move?
Well, so the reason that we actually are going to talk about this a little bit later, but the reason that bankruptcy can be a strategic move, I mean, it's not a good sign. Nobody goes bankrupt because their company's doing well and they want to perform better.
True.
But you do have bankruptcy sometimes done strategically because companies have taken on way too much debt as part of their expansion. And they took on the debt under some assumptions of growth that were true at the time that the debt was taken on, but are not true today because the market's changed. You have COVID, things like that. And as a result of that, you have to basically do something to get out from under that debt. And so you restructure the company, you work with your creditors. That can be a way to move forward. And there's certainly, I mean, within the audio industry, there are, I don't want to name names because some of the stories I heard or details I heard were told to me in confidence, and I don't want to piss these people off. But basically, I've heard about some major names in the industry that are companies that are still around today. They're doing well enough, and they too had become insolvent and had to be rescued. So the goal is to come back. There had been some work about expanding into sound bars and streaming, and they were trying to put together codecs that could be used in those. And I think I think we all know sound bars have become, at this point in time, probably the most popular way that people add sound to their TVs anymore. Streaming, of course, is the most popular way that people are watching content. And so having your codec end up in those is really important. So for those who don't know what Auro 3D is, it was an alternative basically to Dolby Atmos and DTS:X. It's a similar format in a lot of ways, but it has its differences. And one of the key differences that many people recognize was that it had 3 layers instead of 2. So with DTS:X and with Dolby Atmos, what you basically have is a base layer. You can have 5, 7, 9 channels. And then you have ceiling speakers, this overhead layer, which typically is 2, 4, 6. And you can have quite a bit more than that. In the case of Auro 3D, it actually followed an approach that was more similar to what's used in some of the ambisonic systems, which has multiple layers where you've got a base layer, you've got this height layer, and then you've got this overhead layer. And in their case, they use what they call the voice of God. It's like a single overhead. It's not even a requirement. You actually can get away with just doing the height layer instead. So this was all meant to be an alternative approach. One of the other big differences is that this was known as more of a channel-based system, whereas the other two are object-based. They promoted that as a good thing. I mean, I think a lot of people felt that the object-based systems were better, had a lot of benefits to them. One of the reasons why the object-based approach makes a lot of sense from a creation of content and coding side is that the engineer that's doing the mixing doesn't have to know how to mix into the channels where the sound object goes. The software does that mathematically. The engineer just has to place it where they want it visually. And the software can translate that to the speakers. From a decode side, that also has some benefits in that the sound engineer doesn't need to know what speakers you have, how many you have, or where they're located. They only need to know the software basically that's built into the receiver or the processor would actually have that information built in again and can then on the fly translate that to your speakers and remap the sound to where it's supposed to be. So I have to be honest, I never really understood or fully bought into the idea that a channel-based system had benefits. One of the benefits that they had claimed, and this is often one of the benefits that's claimed with things like ambisonics, was that you could create a recording, so basically an encode decode, where the speakers match the recording mics in such a way that you get a really realistic reproduction of what was recorded. So here's the problem with that. That's all based on the assumption that what you're listening to is actually a live musical event. The vast majority of us don't listen to live musical events. We listen to studio recordings. And studio recordings are facsimiles of live musical events. They're kind of edifices, if you will. It's just something that they've made up that's supposed to sound like some sort of an event that's basically in the head of the artist and engineer. So yeah, if you're listening to a live jazz band or you're listening to a classical performance and you're recording and you want to hear exactly what was there in real life, this idea of encode decode from mic to speakers can work. But in practice, it's not a real thing. I mean, Don, Sean, Gene, how often do you guys actually listen to recordings of real live music?
Rarely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan, especially if you hear the audience in the background. That kind of annoys me, to be honest with you.
Well, unless it's really well done.
Yeah, there are some exceptions for sure.
Most of the time, there's a lot of post-production there too.
Yeah, and a lot of times when you're listening to live music, it's typically concerts, right? And so in the case of a concert, what is it you're trying to reproduce? They were up on a stage. The whole thing was being mic'd. You're usually getting it's probably a 2-channel off of the console that they've used to create whatever it is they're creating, which is very different from something like, as an example, an actual symphony, where you're sitting in the audience and the experience is not just that orchestra in front of you, but it's being there in the symphony and hearing the orchestra and all those reflections around the symphonic hall that are creating that event. That makes sense when you're trying to record that and using microphones in the room to create that sort of surround effect. That's not what we're getting in an outdoor live rock concert, right?
Right.
Well, it's venue dependent.
Yeah.
Certain, like recordings of like Hamilton that were recorded live sound amazing because it was done in a properly acoustically designed hall, so you get the benefits of it. But if you're out listening to Monsters of Rock, it's not the same.
Yeah. And that's another one where you're right in the sense that that's a live event. I think in some cases, those types of live events, the benefit is more that there's a certain energy there. The actors, performers are able to vibe off of the audience in some ways. They can vibe off each other. You're getting all that energy. But like in that case, they still were mic'd. And those mics are going into a mixer. And what you're getting is just off the feed from the mixer. So you're hearing some of the venue, but they'd have to be very intentional for you to really hear all of that. But even if you were there, when you go to those events, you're typically hearing this through speakers that are in the venue. It's a little bit different, again, than like a live jazz band or a symphony where what you're hearing is the natural instrument.
Well, you're talking about unamplified live performance.
Unamplified live,
yeah, that's
exactly.
a much different experience for sure.
Yeah. Now I'm realizing that this particular slide is like completely unreadable even to me, but this was talking about the Auro Upmixer. So this was very similar to the system that Dolby and DTS has. So it's an Upmixer basically just takes whatever you feed it. 2-channel, it could be 5.1, it could be something that basically is less channels than you're trying to reproduce. And then it pulls out of that information that it can use to create the other channels. And so the way that this is done is that there's a number of different ways that there's steering logic that's used in some of the more advanced systems. We actually had somebody who joined. So Roger Dressler came on. And the funny thing, Gene, you had been talking, you were listening to the Auro Upmixer, and I had only a little bit of experience with it. I wasn't a huge fan, but I admittedly hadn't listened to it a lot. You really didn't like it.
Well, let's preface that. We're talking about 2-channel upmixing because the 2-channel upmixer is different than the 5.1 channel upmixer. So what I noticed when listening to 2-channel upmixing in Auro, it was just copy and paste. It was taking the stereo information and basically putting it in all the other channels with a low pass filter and some delay. There was no steering logic. It was nothing like the Dolby Surround Upmixer or the DTS X upmixers that use steering logic. And I said this in my video. I said, it sounds like all channel stereo with some low pass filter and some delay. And then I got an email from Roger Dressler, who was formerly the codec guru for Dolby years ago. I mean, this guy invented ProLogic 2 and he has incredible accolades to his name. And he basically mimicked exactly what I was saying. Now, there's cases where that could actually be preferred depending on the type of music.
Remember when we did all that listening, Gene, and some songs sounded better in formats than others. Overall, we liked the Atmos upmixes, but the Auro really, in a lot of ways, sounded like an all-channel stereo. From a processor.
Yeah. So what I experienced was if you get music with a lot of decorrelated information, like for example, Dominique Fia-May, the one that we interviewed a few months back, her music was very transient. There was a lot of layering to her music, and the Dolby Surround Upmixer just put it in the right places, and it sounded like it almost sounded like a discrete Atmos recording. That's how good the upmixing was. Now, if you shut the main speakers off and you listen to those surround channels, there's some artifacting. You could hear some pumping with the DTS X upmixer, and you could hear some kind of clipping, almost digital clipping with the Dolby Surround Upmixer. I didn't hear that with the Dolby ProLogic 2X, the Dolby ProLogic 2X upmixers from the last generation, but it was, I heard it with the DSU and I heard it on DTS X. Auro did not have any artifacting, which was a positive in that aspect, but it was just copy paste. It was taking all the lyrics, throwing it into the ceiling, and it just did not sound natural to me. But then when I go and listen to just acoustic, like jazz guitar music, something that isn't as transient as that, I actually turned on the Auro Upmixer and I preferred that because it kept all of the sound kind of focused towards the front and the height of the room. And it just made the venue sound larger, but it didn't take away from the stereo focus. So what I do is I mix, I choose between the 3 different upmixes with whatever new music I listen to. And I make a decision within the first 2 minutes to see what I prefer, what sounds best to me. So it's great to have that variety. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have that variety, but there are limitations to each of these up mixers. And the Auro 2D or the Auro 3D up mixer was a disappointment to me because there's so many people online claiming it's like their new religion, like it's better than everything else out there. And I'm here to tell you it's not. It's just different. It's not better. It's different. And
It's
if you
another
like
flavor.
There's got to be a human being factor to that, because over the years, I would do a surround sound system for a client and they would listen to it. Then they would call me like, hey, I don't hear anything out of my back speakers. It was like they were completely obsessed with hearing sound from these back speakers. So I'd go over and try to explain it to them. I'm like, listen, there's only information there when it's supposed to be there.
Right.
But people, then I'd put it on all channel stereo. They're like, that's awesome. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I mean, if you've got the speakers, you want to think that there's something kind of coming out of them, or you expect something to come out of them. I mean, that's a real thing.
Yeah. I think often when stuff gets mixed the way it's supposed to be in terms of being more realistic, that people perceive it as boring, basically. And I think it's because they're expecting it to call their attention more than it really does in the real world. And that's why you get that.
Bingo.
But I think, so Gene, to your point, that was one of the things we had listed here, was that what we had found was and Roger basically said this, he said that there is an approach that's used by some for creating up mixers. And this predates Auro. This isn't like they were the first to ever do this. Because even, I think he was saying Dolby had played around with versions of this they had tried out that are simpler. And they basically rely primarily on copying and pasting the information over to the other speakers. And then sometimes there's some low pass filtering. Often there's some reverb that's added, things like that. Mm-hmm. Certainly Yamaha's famous for doing the added reverb idea. Yeah. And he was saying there's nothing really wrong with it. It's a different approach. And he was saying the benefit of it is exactly what you said. It's prone to have no artifacts. The steering logic approaches that they went with instead, the DTS also went with, has the potential to be a little bit more realistic in how it's steering information around in terms of trying to recreate this musical experience, if you will. But I have to go back to the idea I'd said before, which was that while in concept, I get what Roger was saying, and I get what others are saying in terms of what sounds more real, the fact that most of the music we're reproducing through these upmixers is studio recordings for which there is no real event means that what you guys said before is exactly true. This is just a different flavor, and it really ultimately is up to the end user of what they want to do and what sounds good to them. There's no more realistic, because none of this is realistic. And anything you do to it is simply changing it from something that's even less realistic than it was in the first place.
Yeah, and it's important to note, too, that the bass levels change pretty drastically with Auro. I did a video and I measured the bass level for 2-channel versus upmixing with the Dolby Atmos, and there was maybe a dB difference. And if memory serves, the bass level rose almost 6 dB with Auro, depending on the room size setting. So right there, if you calibrate your system correctly, you know, and you get your LCRs calibrated with your subs, and then you go and throw the upmixer on it, your bass level is going to be 4 to 6 dB higher than what your calibration is. So that's something.
Well, who used to do that back in the day was DTS.
Oh yeah, you're right, Don. Those DTS
every time I'd watch a movie, I'd play the DTS version because it just rocked. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's something they did.
So the other thing that Roger mentioned, I don't know if it's in your slide presentation, but he was talking about how good the steering logic is with the Dolby upmixer. And in 5.1, when you upmix 5.1 to Atmos, it's actually, the steering logic is pretty perfect. Like there's no artifacting going on that. So I thought that was interesting because there's been times where I think I was playing Star Trek Strange New Worlds and The Boys. You guys watch any of those shows?
The Boys.
The Boys upmixed. The Boys upmixed to the DSU. It sounds like Atmos. Like it's pretty freaking amazing. Awesome show as well. But so it's, you know, at the end of the day, what you have and you experiment with is really up to you, what you prefer. But I also want to talk about the speaker layouts, because people get really hung up on speaker layouts. And Don, you of all people know this because you've done hundreds of installs. People sitting there calculating with protractors, they have to have the exact.
So I had a client a few years ago who got hooked up with one of these experts on the home theater forum and talked him into doing this full layered Auro 3D layout with the base layer, then a height layer, then a ceiling layer. And he wanted to, I'm like, you want to do what? I mean, we wired it for him, but I mean, he spent a ton of money to have this format. And I'm like, dude, there's nothing you can watch in it other than upmixing it. Oh no, it's coming. It's going to be the dominant format, you know, because he was getting misled by an internet trained expert on one of those forums and spent a ton of money that he didn't have to spend on something that just wasn't real. It kind of ticked me off a little bit back in the day, but you know, you harbor grudges a little bit, but I just never, I mean, I wanted to believe that there was this great new format that was going to offer the next step up in surround sound. It just never happened. For many years, I waited for it to happen, and it never did. So I think it was a lot of people wasted a lot of money they didn't have to do. Well,
and I think you're giving us a good lead into this next part of the presentation, which was getting into availability. So I think there's commonly an argument between, you know, is it you build it and they'll come kind of a thing, or you know, is it content? Is it infrastructure? Is it do you have to get in with the people at the movie companies and develop contracts? And I think Dolby, more than anybody, did this right, to the point that it was, I think many of us were actually getting upset with the way they were handling it. They were creating contracts with the content side that was making it so that Dolby Atmos was it. It couldn't be in any other format. And then from the decode side, you could use Dolby Atmos and their upmixers, and that was it. They were restricting everything else. And their contracts were pretty rock solid, and it was making it, you know, so, you know, from the standpoint of a sort of democracy, if you will, in the codec world, that wasn't happening at all. This was being forced on us. On the other hand, it made it so that everything was there and just worked. We all had, you know, everybody would have a format that we all have a decoder for. We would have the right speaker layout for. The content was available. And at the end of the day, like it or not, it worked. I mean, they were very effective at getting their system into everybody's homes, to this point that probably all of us have Dolby Atmos and access to a ton of content. Auro didn't do that. And as a result of that, they were really late to the game in getting content. So one of the biggest problems they had was we just don't have access to it. Even when they would get to major labels and make deals with them, it was overseas only. And it was either movies we get, but we didn't get access to it in Auro. And we're the largest market by far in terms of dollars for movies. And I hear people sometimes will point out, they'll say, well, no, India's a bigger market, or they'll mention there's a country in Africa, I'm forgetting the name of it now. It's like the second largest movie market in the world or something.
Nigeria?
Like that. Is it Nigeria? Yeah.
Wow.
And
I didn't know that.
Everything.
It's what I may have that off, but it's something like that. In any case, money-wise, neither one of those is comparable to the United States. We spend more money on films for the most part, and there's a lot more that goes into production. And then the rest of the world tends to watch our films. So at this point in time, when you look at the earnings of films, the US is somewhere between a third and half of the total earnings, and all the rest of it comes from the rest of the world. So if you just ignore the US film production side, there's a real problem. Yeah. It's kind of the end of the format. And I think the fact that Auro wasn't able to, I don't think it was intentional. I think they would have liked to have been in the US market. I think they couldn't. They were pushed out and they didn't have a way in. And I think that was a real problem. So I think the other thing was they weren't in enough processors. And Gene, that was bothering you for a while too. You basically had Storm, which was, they founded themselves originally to be an Auro processor. I'm gonna say something I don't know is true, and they can correct me, or you may know this not to be true. My guess is they founded themselves because they too thought that Auro was going to be the future. And when it became apparent that that wasn't true, they changed course. And while they didn't abandon Auro, they added everything else on, and then basically just became a really good processor with all the different codecs.
I think we all wanted Auro to succeed at the beginning. I mean, I was excited about it at first. I mean, listen, there's a lot of hate coming from Dolby right now, but let me tell you something. If it wasn't for Dolby, we wouldn't have surround sound in the way we have it today.
No shit. Yeah.
We wouldn't have surround and music. You know, we wouldn't have tapes that didn't have hiss. I mean, Dolby's done a lot of great stuff. So you call them a juggernaut. That's maybe they are, but you know, I tend to focus on the hardware and the processors and the chain that goes from there versus just a company that makes it. TTS had some cool stuff, but it was overly done. as we all can admit.
Well, DTS, I thought DTS was going to win the format war when we had Blu-ray. They were de facto standard on Blu-ray, and then after Ultra HD Blu-ray came out and Atmos came out, and Atmos became the streaming standard, and Atmos became the standard for Ultra HD Blu-ray, DTS kind of folded. I mean, it's like you don't hardly see any software.
When DVDs themselves first came out, DTS, I always wanted the DTS disc. I always Gladiator came out in the DTS version. I always look for that as an audiophile going way back.
Yeah, there was less compression.
Well, yeah, but it was almost too much sometimes. And as the years went by and Dolby got better at what they did, I tend to lean towards the Dolby mixes now as a standard. But listen, nobody here, so you guys know, we're not here to kick Auro in the teeth. We're here to go, this is a shame, but Auro really never delivered on what they promised, and that's why they're in bankruptcy, and they're probably going to die really soon. That's just the bottom line.
Well, the one other point I want to add that Matt doesn't have on this bullet list is the biggest licensee of Auro 3D in the consumer market is Sound United, right? Denon and Marantz. They were the first to do it across most of their AVRs.
Yeah.
What's that?
They're trendsetters.
They're trendsetters, yeah.
They really are.
So here's my biggest problem with how that went down. And I'm not blaming Auro on this because I think this was a decision that Sound United people made. And every time I ask them emails or I send them emails about this, they're like, we can't talk about it now, but it might be something we're addressing in the future. You go out and you buy a Denon 6700 receiver or 4700 or a Marantz SR 7015 or 8015. You've got Auro 3D support. You've got DTS-X. You got Dolby Atmos. You go and you set yourself up for a 7.1.4 conventional system with speakers in the ceiling for your tops. You can't use Auro 3D. The only way you could use Auro 3D right now, as we're doing this live stream, is you have to misconfigure your tops as heights. Now, how many average Joe consumers out there that buy an AVR that set it up, first of all, know to do this? And secondly, how many people actually want to misconfigure it? Because now you're not properly mapping the Atmos content, which 95% of the time you're going to be using the receiver in Atmos, not in Auro.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big oversight on the Sound United part, and Auro not being more proactive with saying, hey, let us open up the speaker formats. And that was another problem. I watched Wilfred and go to battle with Craig Eggers and all the other guys at one of these conferences years ago. They were fighting about speaker angles. This is what cracks me up about the industry. They fight about literally 10 or 15 fucking degrees.
Dumb shit.
Fighting about, right? Stupid shit. So if Auro would have conceded and said, you know what, we want our format to work with tops, with speakers in the ceiling, they might have had a fighting chance. I worked for a tech company back in the 90s. I was developing ADSL and MVL. It was called MVL, the proprietary technology. It was basically DSL over POTS, over the phone lines. And the company I worked for had their own proprietary technology. There was already established standards in the industry for ADSL with the POT splitters, with the phone filters. They wanted to do their own thing because they thought they were better. They didn't want to conform. They wanted to have their own. They didn't want to license their technology. They wanted to be proprietary, and they died 5 years later.
So let's talk about something that's probably the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Look, it's not so much the format. It's the mix. It's the guy or gal who sits behind the console and creates the mix. Because I've got Dolby Surround Atmos mixes that I play on Apple TV that are magical, like Queen as an example, or Pink Floyd. But then other ones just sound like somebody threw it together. It's the mix and the artist that matters more than the format, I'm telling you. So it's real. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces in all this conversation. You're not, Auro's not going to magically make your sound better. I mean, it's just not. You may prefer it, but I mean, I'm just saying it's the mix and how the artist, or how the recording artist, which I call them artists because they truly are, how they mix the sound. And we've had that, Gene, on your show. I mean, we've had that. Yeah. We've talked about that. All the difference in the world.
I actually think that so in movies, they've been doing surround sound for a long time. And I think they've gotten pretty good at what they're trying to achieve with that. And there's some that are better than others for sure. Obviously, there's movies we all like better in the way they've done the mixes. Music is a totally different
Totally different
beast. And I think that it's actually, if you think of how you mix to the different speakers as equating it to like an artist who's painting, this is like the different colors and textures that they get to use to recreate that music. And I think it's as if for years, all we had was black and white and shades of gray. And all of a sudden we've given them 1.3 million different colors to use and said, here, now you have this, go with it. And I think that there's going to be a lot of, it's kind of like it was in the early days of trying to do like quad, for instance, where they were just, or even stereo, early stereo, just ping ponging between the speakers.
Quad, like you're old enough to remember that.
I'm not, but I know the format at least, and I know what they were doing with it. That was another one where it was like, ooh, let's make the drum travel around someone's head in all dimensions, and it was like,
dude, back in the early '80s when you were high, listening to quad, it was the best shit ever, man.
Oh yeah.
A friend told me that. I don't know that. I'm not old enough to know that.
Well, to the point, I think that ultimately with this, what's going to need to happen is the engineers are going to need to start to kind of figure this out and decide, what they want. I know there's some people that are really into this. I happen to personally take kind of a strong view of, I'm not a huge fan of when they mix the music so it sounds like you're like in the band. So there's sort of two mix approaches that are used with music commonly. One is you're in the audience, and the other one is that you're actually like their center in the band. To me, I've never sat down right with the band and listened. So in my head, at least, what I'm visualizing when I'm listening to a recording of musicians is that they are in front of me and they're performing like on a stage. Mm-hmm. So that's how I kind of expect it to be mixed. I think this is something they need to figure out, though. That's the point. But with this one, we were talking about, there was two main issues, just to make sure we cover this. And Gene, I can't believe I forgot I did actually mean to include Denon and Marantz, and you told me that I was missing that stuff. I couldn't understand what you were talking about. Now I see I forgot it. But so there weren't enough processors that included it. Somebody included a statistic here. I have no idea if that's correct, but we could probably go with it. It was something like 100% of the available processors have Dolby Atmos and DTSX, and only like 53% or something like that include Auro. So one of the big problems was just a lack. And even like Yamaha and Arcam, they only just recently, in the last year, added it. And then the other problem was content. I mean, there's no streaming services available in the US that offer it. There's no movies that offer it. There's very little music. Again, the music isn't mainstream for the most part.
Wait a minute. I got a disc. Hold on. Let me pull that one up.
So this guy Jingle Nuts is like Dolby.
Here we go. This is in Auro 3D.
Well, I mean, that's why I listen to it all the time.
Just watching that. So this guy Jingle Nuts said Dolby and DTS are all money-making schemes. Sorry, comrade. Isn't the job? Do you have a job? If you do, isn't that a money-making scheme too? I mean, they're a business, dude. Come on, really? That's what you got? Troll better.
Yeah. People have said that about THX, and it's like, yes, they're making money on what they do. They're also establishing standards and holding people accountable.
I don't know, Don. I don't know about you, Don, but when you're sitting on a Friday night and you have Apple Music streaming and spatial audio, like the new Weekend album or something,
badass, dude.
Are you worried about if Dolby's making a profit? And you're
actually, I am, because I'm kind of a socialist, and I don't think anybody should make money. There should be free audio surround formats for everybody.
Yes.
Capitalism is evil. Get the fuck out of here.
All right. So moving on. Okay, we got a super chat here.
We
Not
do.
Sure a lot of work, but would you love to see the highlights of these videos? I don't have the time to watch them all. Good job as always. That's a good idea, Sergio. And I'm trying to do little clips here and there when I can. And I'll try to timestamp this at least so you guys could skip around on it. But Matt still has a presentation to go, so let me put the mic back on.
So Obsessive Audio has also mentioned MPEG-H and if there's any adoption. So just really quickly, I mentioned, for those who don't know, MPEG-H is essentially an open source multi-channel format that was expected to be an alternative to these. In terms of adoption, I haven't seen any. I think it's the same issue. Dolby's kind of got the market cornered, so it'd be pretty hard to get anyone to switch over. All right, so Auro was trying to separate itself from the competition. They were doing this by, and looking at the marketing suggests that they're trying to separate themselves from the competition by having a better universal encode decode option. That's the claim that they're trying to make. But everything they claim is true of the competition. In other words, everything they're saying that makes them different is actually not different. That's how the others work as well. In the case of Dolby and DTS, if you are using basically a mixing software, the software has something built in that makes it easy for you to take a standard mix and then you can output it as whatever you want. It takes what you want and puts it out into a format that has the right metadata for your processor down the road to be able to decode that the way it needs to be. So there was nothing really special there. And the competition is better established and has wider available products. So at the end of the day, it wasn't different.
That's a good point right here. Your marketing has to be on point. We don't buy tissues, we buy Kleenex. Similarly, everyone on the others know about Atmos, but no one knows about Auro. That's a good point. Very few people, I should say.
Well, and the reality is trying to fight a juggernaut like Dolby was a bit of a losing battle. But you made a point earlier. DTS did that very successfully. They managed to put out a product that at one point had really superseded Dolby. It was the de facto. It was what was out there. And then Dolby came back really strong, so strong that basically nobody else has been, I think, nearly as successful. It's a little bit crazy, actually. So is Auro 3D really a 3D surround format? This is just one of my pet peeves. It's not. And Don and I actually had a guy, Edgar, on. We're going to have him on again. He's an expert in this concept, and he's brought up a point about this. But I just have to point out, there is no such thing currently as a 3D surround format that's in wide use. So they do exist, but they're not actually being used for anything that a consumer could buy. And so there really aren't any 3D formats. Dolby and DTS do not offer true 3D formats. Auro, even though it calls itself 3D, is also not. And one of the main things that it's missing is it has an inability to reproduce proximity. And so, Gene, if you recall, I one time had put in these binaural mics and we were doing the show and you were like, dude, you're freaking me out. It sounds like you're right behind me.
Yep.
So that's an example of proximity, is when somebody is talking using one of these reproduction systems and you can actually hear not just that they're moving around some sphere around you, but they're able to move in and out of your space, if you will, forward and back.
Yeah.
That's called proximity. And for a system to be able to recreate that is actually fairly difficult. It requires that there's an understanding of, from a recording standpoint, where everything is supposed to be placed can be directly attributed to where the speakers are relative to where the listener is. So ambisonics is a format that can do that. Binaural actually is a system that can do that, done correctly. But these surround systems cannot. All right.
So not yet. Edgar's onto something, man. He's what you talk about, a genius.
He is.
He's literally a rocket scientist.
Yeah, it's true. He is. Well, we'll have him on again. He's going to talk more about his commercial product, which is starting to get more wide adoption as well. So
wait a minute before you go on to this. I thought a couple of years ago, Auro was trying to break into the car market, and I haven't heard a whole lot since. Have you heard anything about that? Because now
I heard Yugo's adopting them, their new line of cars that they're coming out. The Auro 3D.
What was that brand? Daewoo. Remember Daewoo?
The Daewoo. It's a surround housing 1000. Yeah.
No, because now you have D-Rack is getting involved in cars, and I think D-Rack is doing their own form of upmixing as well. And obviously you got Dolby, and you've got some Tesla's using something proprietary, right, Matt?
Bose has been doing it for years. Yeah. Bose has their own version of Dolby.
Well, you've got Meridian has been doing this for a while. I mean,
it's a hard space to compete in. So if they think they're going to save the company on that, that's going to be really difficult.
Remember Logic 7 with Harman?
Yeah, the Lexicon Logic 7.
Logic 7
really good
lost
system.
to Pro Logic 2.
It was actually really good
about that.
Yeah. So I didn't find anything specifically about it. It's possible that they couldn't find a partner or had decided to put that on hold in favor of something else. But, one of the problems you've got with that is you can't just put out a codec and hope for the best. You have to have a partner. I mean, in the case of Dolby Atmos, for instance, they aren't just offering it in generic cars. There are cars with Dolby Atmos systems that you can get. There's actually not a lot of those, but there are some. Most of these rely on upmixers, as you mentioned. And so a lot of them have proprietary upmixers that are used in them. Dirac is used in quite a bit of cars. Volvo has it. It's used in the Bowers and Wilkins systems, I believe, which are available in BMW. And I couldn't even tell you how many others. There's various other brands that are carrying that. BMW's been using Dirac actually even in a proprietary system for a long time. They were probably one of the earliest partners. So all of those systems, you're right. It's hard to compete in that. You've got to break through. They're very established. Harman is in tons of different cars under various brand names. You know, realistically, those brand names don't reflect what the speakers are. It's just a badging they're putting on it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know that that would be a smart move for them necessarily. I think trying to get into the streaming soundbar market might be a better first move, which is what I had read was their next steps.
Can I say something real quick? And I know everybody's going to jump on.
No, Don, we don't want to hear from you.
You got to hear from him whether you want to or not.
Shut up, Professor. So I was hanging out with a buddy. They rented a house on a lake, Airbnb, and they had a freaking sound bar sitting on a cabinet with a subwoofer. And I was pretty blown away with how good it sounded. I hate to say that. Yeah, like a powered sound bar. It actually sounded, I could swear there were, I spent 20 minutes looking for rear speakers. It was actually really cool. So, I mean, there's hope.
Yeah, you can actually get, I think people sometimes write this off, but if you're sitting in the right sweet spot using the technology that basically Edgar has been promoting, it's an old concept. He's just kind of done it better than others, that utilizes crosstalk cancellation, can allow you to place speakers around a person pretty convincingly. And so
I was pretty drunk, but it still sounded amazing.
I think
that's par
can
for the
be.
course.
Yeah, Yamaha and Sony actually have both put out sound bars that do that.
Yep.
That when you're in the right position, they work pretty well.
Yeah, Yamaha.
So, okay, so back to this. We were talking about, is it really unique? So the thing that made it unique, if you will, I think it would be unfair to say it's not. It's clearly different from the competition. It's the only one that ever took this 3-layer approach and tried to bring it to the mainstream market. It looks a lot like Ambisonics. Let's see, Mercedes and Porsche use Auro 3D.
There you
All
go.
right, I didn't know that. So I guess they did get into the car market then.
They used to use Auro 3D.
They used to. Well, again, the bankruptcy appears to be a reorganization. It's not out of business yet. So they also had a hybrid approach that was similar to some of what was being used by others, and uses some technology that came out of Ambisonics, which would be the mathematical method of, I mean, for those who don't know, the way that object-based audio systems work is that you basically are using these mathematical formulas that were derived for Ambisonics, and you use it to place sound in a certain space around you. And the hybrid approach basically uses the channel-based idea, which is where you're placing it in a particular speaker at a certain level and delay, and then you're also using the ability to place objects in different parts of space using that formula. The height layer is a standard part of Ambisonics, like I said, but Ambisonics is not a standard format available to consumers. It's really more a research format. It never was successful with consumers. There's been a couple little bit of, like, we'll call them false start attempts. Didn't really work out. But Ambisonics, like other true 3D formats, became ineffective in the presence of strong room reflection. So one of the problems with Ambisonics, and basically any approach that relies on that concept, it's one of the reasons why I suspect Dolby and DTS really didn't attempt to pull in too much from Ambisonics into what they were doing, was that 3D capability, if you will, the ability to reproduce sound in 3 dimensions like that, required that the room itself be essentially anechoic. And so what you would find is often these were being set up in fairly large rooms. They were heavily treated. And I've actually worked on some projects where people have attempted to build Ambisonics into a residential room where the speakers are, Don and Sean, you guys deal with this. How often do you get to place the speakers in exactly the right location that the standard says they're supposed to be, exactly the right angles, pointed exactly where they're supposed to be in the right distance? Like, is that 10% of systems? 1% of systems?
Rarely. I mean, we do the best we can, but listen, even if you don't place them in the right or correct exact angle, it still sounds really good. We have ways
for normal surround systems.
Normal surround systems, yeah, it sounds really great.
For Ambisonics, it falls apart, and that's one of the reasons why that approach never caught on. Was that you guys, everybody, rarely has the ability to place a speaker exactly where it's supposed to be, and so any format that requires that speakers be in a very specific location to be able to work is sort of a dead format in the consumer market.
Agree.
So one of the other things that was being said was, I don't know why this is aromatics. It's supposed to be aromatic.
Typo.
Sorry guys. The Upmixer, is it really more natural or real sounding? So I mean, I guess I say I shouldn't speak for you guys. I don't think that it's really fair to say that. And the reason why I say that is that stereo itself is devoid of realism in terms of music reproduction, from the standpoint that it doesn't have the, if you call it, the spaciousness of a real live performance. And in fact, studio recordings are worse in the sense that they're devoid of any spatial properties that are tied to a real environment. It's just artificial. It's whatever they've put into it. Now, the engineer might be really good at recreating that, but unless it was recorded in a real room, it isn't real. And so one of the issues you've got is upmixers are trying to take a studio-based stereo recording with artificial spaciousness that's been added to it, whatever that is, usually it's reverb, and turn it into something that's supposed to somehow sound more real to us. But what's real? What's our point of comparison? So I feel like arguing that Aromatic is a more realistic upmixer is a pretty silly argument. I don't know what you guys think.
Marketing.
Yeah, well, you already know my thoughts. I did several videos on comparing the upmixers and
we spent hours in your room listening. I mean, and several of the Audioholics family did. I mean, we're avid listeners, and listen, we went into it. We even talked about, remember, Gene, let's give this a fair shake. Like, let's see if this is really a better format. And you know, very few people have systems at the level you have with the Storm audio and the amplification and the speakers and the acoustically treated room. So we had a tremendous platform to listen on, and we all kind of came up with the same conclusion independently. It sounds artificial. It sounds like all channel stereo. Like it just wasn't a natural format.
It's like taking a cheeseburger and just adding more cheese and more ketchup.
I mean, like realistically, we weren't trying to be jerks because we had this preconception that Auro was, well, maybe Matt was, but we had this preconception, you know, that we didn't have that we wanted to listen and say, hey, is this legitimately better? And we listened to many songs, and some sounded really good on it, to be fair, right, Gene? I mean, but the vast majority, it sounded artificial, whereas the Dolby Atmos mix sounded more natural as the surrounds were supporting the front channels.
Right. It sounded more discreet
versus everything being like, I don't need my side speakers blaring in my ear. And that's basically what it was. And we concluded that, you know, based on
Don, I think this point here is exactly what you said before. When you set up a system for a client, they didn't hear their surround speakers all the time. So you put it in all channel stereo, then all of a sudden they loved it better because every speaker was playing at the same time.
Many times I've done that and set it on all channel stereo, and they're like, that sounds amazing. I'm like, because people spend all this money to have these speakers put in, and they want to hear it. They want to know that they got sound come from there, even if it's not supposed to be there. And that's just a human trait. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
So we done with this slide, Matt? Are you ready to move on, or
we can move on? Yeah.
You got to make your text bigger next time, my friend.
I know. Sorry, I was trying to make it look flashy, I guess. All right. So can Auro Technologies bounce back? Well, here's what I think. I think to succeed, they need to bring competitive end-to-end products to market for streaming, sound bars, and headphone listening. So those are the biggest markets, as we know. And if you're going to be competitive, you've got to have something that works there. And end-to-end means there needs to be content available that's been encoded in this. And then there needs to be hardware that we can use it with. So there's got to be sound bars that have the Auro 3D products. There may be products out there. Some of you who are more up on what's currently out, please correct me. I'm not aware, in the United States at least, of any sound bar that has Auro built into it for decoding. No. So then you've got headphone listening. I'm not a huge headphone fan myself, to be honest, other than as a convenience when I'm walking around or traveling. But it's a bigger market at this point in time than listening through speakers. And so you can't ignore that market when that's become true. And then streaming is content, and we have to have it. And then I think that Auro needs to offer compatible products with existing mainstream products at a better cost of entry. So if you're going to try to beat Dolby, I mean, their biggest issue is licensing costs. That's one of the, and they have restrictions as well. So if you want to beat them, then offer something that's compelling at a better price.
Sound better, period. Drop the mic.
And be easy to use, and be industry-wide adaptable. I like your last point. Auro's future should be in the native content, not end user upmix. And that's probably the best point right there. A format cannot survive just on upmixing.
It can, and that doesn't mean you can't have an upmixer. That's a need. Everybody has them. You've got to have a way of taking existing content and taking advantage of it in these multi-channel systems. But I think that they were relying too heavily on the upmixer and not putting enough effort into trying to get native content out there.
Yep.
I mean, even if you can't, one of the things that I think people have been saying this about the Dolby Atmos music. I mean, Gene, we've experienced this. I am really excited that streaming services are offering Dolby Atmos music. Having said that, the quality of it, the quality of the mixes has not been that great so far. I mean, a lot of it is weird.
It depends. Some of the new artists like The Weeknd and believe it or not, Ariana Grande and what's that other girl's name? Doja Cat and Canon.
Smelly Cat.
These are mainstream artists that are doing world-class surround mixes. Like if you listen to any of The Weeknd's productions, you will not believe how good it sounds in Atmos.
Yeah, surround music's a new thing.
Yeah.
I mean, well, we've had it from DTS Music and SAC, but this is like a big new thing that Apple's really stepped up and pushed. So I'm not
they
concerned.
Put a lot of money behind it.
I'm not concerned with the format. I'm concerned with the artists that are trying to calibrate it.
Well, we have David Frangione on regularly, and he mixes.
Oh yeah, he's amazing. Let's focus on the quality of the mix.
Yeah, they put a ton of marketing dollars into doing spatial audio for streaming. So that's a year and a half ago, I would have never thought this would be the case, and I'm loving it. I mean, anyone that has an Atmos system that's not streaming in Atmos music right now, you're really missing out. And
I'm a huge 2-channel guy, just like Matt is, and just like Gene is. But here's the bottom line, and you can quote me on this because I'm rarely ever wrong. Surround sound music properly recorded is the best way to experience music, period, hands down, end of story. It's amazing, period.
So here's a good question before we get back into the slide presentation. The Voice of God channel is a waste to install now.
Yep.
I would say yes, because most of the Voice of God channel, I mean, most of the software that was in Auro, which maybe 6 or 7 titles?
It's more than that, but it's not a lot.
Okay, 50 titles. Let's give them 50. A large portion of them didn't even use the Voice of God channel. So if you're choosing between a Voice of God channel versus adding wides,
Voice of God,
or adding back channels, Voice of God should be the last on your list.
Voice of bullshit.
Yeah.
So I would just say, I mean, it depends what you're going for, but given that we don't even know the future of Auro, the idea that you'd be dedicating space and money to that speaker, which there is no other format that uses it, I think is risky. I mean, there's an argument to be made that you don't need to use a particularly good speaker for that one. So you could always put the speaker in and wire for it and not necessarily use it until we're more certain that format has a future. But I would be very concerned. I wouldn't want to spend the time and money on it.
Dean, remember when we had this debate?
We did.
When we were designing your theater.
Yep.
Remember we had that
exact debate.
And you're like, oh, I should add the Voice of God. I'm like, bullshit. You don't need that. And you're like, are you sure? I'm like, dude, how are you going to use it?
Yeah.
And I mean, aren't you glad we didn't do that now and added an additional speaker?
Yeah. I mean, well, if I would say this, if you're doing new construction, run 14.4 to that location. So if you ever want to add more height channels or whatever, you have the ability to do something with that pre-wire, but just don't cut a hole in your ceiling and spend $500-600 on a speaker that you're never going to use.
Well, swirling dragon mist. No, up is not a silly axis. It done properly, it's a great axis like Atmos. We use it all the time.
All right, so I think a lot of people are wondering how serious is bankruptcy, and we actually touched upon this earlier. But I mean, there's 2 types of bankruptcies that you can have. There's one that's basically focused on liquidating a company. That's where a company's become insolvent, has no path forward, and basically just needs to settle its debts whatever way it can. There usually isn't anywhere near enough assets to settle the debts, and so you go to court so that a court can figure out how to take what you have and hand it out to everybody you owe money to. And you as a company are done. The other one is for restructuring. My understanding is that's what's happening here. So they're both for protecting against debt, but there's no, as far as I understand it, there's no attempt to dissolve Auro as a company right now. This is about restructuring, and basically they don't have money to pay their debts, but they have a path forward, and so they're hoping to probably make some sort of a deal with their creditors in order to do that. I tried to find some information on their debt. I couldn't find a lot. It seemed like that they had taken some possibly venture capital money early on, but that seemed like quite a long time ago. That was in the neighborhood of around $70 or $80 million. that could be the debt they owe. There might be other
Yeah.
money they owe. I don't really know. I would have thought that they would have done enough licensing with somebody like Sound United and others to start to make that back. But of course, they've got a lot of development costs they have to do as well.
Listen, none of us here wanted this to happen necessarily. You know what I mean? It's not like we're beating up on Auro. It's just we've called this game for a long time because there was just no software available. I know I feed my family and make a living designing theater systems and surround systems for people, and it just was never on my radar because it was irrelevant. People pay me a whole lot of money to design them amazing systems, and when it was brought up, I just dismissed it whenever I could because it just wasn't relevant. Even if people wanted to prep for it and wire it, I'm like, look, man, it's just not something that's looking like it's ever going to grab any dirt and become something that's a player format. I mean, that's the truth. Look at DTS. I mean, honestly, ask yourself, how many of you ever listen to DTS or DTSX? Honestly, anymore.
Yeah,
I used to listen to DTS all the time.
Yep.
I'm more concerned with the quality of the mix because I mean, Atmos sounds amazing when it's done properly. Why would I care about? I mean, listen, and I'm a capitalist. I'm all about another company coming in and changing the game. And, you know, I don't know about Dolby's chokehold on Hollywood and whatnot. All I know is when I was a little kid watching movies, it was a Dolby surround and it enchanted me. So I'm cool with that. It's like the thing with THX. When I first heard about THX being a Star Wars nerd, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And Thomas and Holman and the whole story. But we wouldn't have home theater as we have it today if it was not for Dolby and THX. Say what you want, but you absolutely know it's true. And even, you know, THX has changed hands, but back when it was with Lucasfilm, if somebody came out with a competing format that was legit and we could actually wire for it in a, you know, nonsensical way, like not everybody has theater rooms. I'm sure probably 90% of people that listen to surround sound or 95% of people listen in living rooms and family
media rooms. Yeah.
Well, just a family room, just like I have. If you can do it in that, then good on you. But if you've got like, you know, 2 layers of speakers and a voice of God and all that, it's just not feasible. You know, I mean, Tom Holman came out with a surround format that used speakers on the floor a few years ago. Remember that, Gene?
Yeah.
It just never took off because
you're right.
You have to make it in the constraints of what you're going to do in the average home. And it's just not feasible.
Yep. We got a super chat from Vamps TV. Voice of God only made sense for IMAX and real theater. I'm not sure what IMAX did with that. I guess that could be true. I know the IMAX layout's a little bit different. All the channels of full range and stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
So think about this, guys. Hear me out. If Matt, you know what you can do with a pair of stereo speakers. You can have 3-dimensional magical sound, right, Gene?
Yep.
You can have sound that goes all the way around you. I've had reflections come from behind me just on 2 speakers. Does necessarily add an 18 or that one theater I did was 23 speakers. Is that really going to make that big a difference because of the encoding in it? Wouldn't you? I would rather have 7 or 10 really well placed, really well designed,
high quality
sound than I would 23 monitors located all around the room where it was just ridiculous. I mean,
well, and that's the thing I noticed about when I was at the various trade shows and I saw the Auro 3D setups. They were using really small satellite speakers for the base layer, then the height layer, all, you know, 6.5-inch or 5-inch 2-way speakers, very dynamically limited speakers. And I have a different approach to doing home theater systems. I like very dynamic LCRs and then adding my height channels on top of that.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of these people are, like you said, they're adding more speakers as opposed to focusing on the quality of your
There's other issues that come into play when you do that. Like it just you have to be in a certain position to really take advantage of it, man. I mean, there's so much BS in this industry. Again, there's a lot of internet educated influencers who've had like 10 systems they've heard in their life, and they're going to program your system and tell you how you should do shit. Dude, do your own research. Don't trust in what you see on the internet. Audioholics has been doing this for what, 25 years?
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're Right. We live and love this. It's not like we just do this to get, clicks on something. When we talk, Matt, what do we talk about when we talk usually? It's kids sometimes, but usually what? Audio.
Yeah.
It's
You talking about our personal conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. We live for this.
Politics too.
Well,
we won't get into that.
I can't help you there.
So I'll just say you're touching upon something though that we've talked about a lot, and I think it's really, really underappreciated, and that's the idea of essentially diluting your budget. I think people underestimate how much they affect the quality of their system when they dilute their budget with more channels. And I have clients that come to me all the time. I'm sure you guys have this issue too. And they'll say, so I'm thinking of putting together, like a 9.4.6 system. So it's like maximizing the number of speakers in the room. My room is 15 by 10 feet. It's the bedroom I'm going to convert. And my budget is, we'll just say $20,000. What can you do for me? And it's like, well, man, the first thing is we need to strip away from those speakers. Let's start with 5 for base layer. You definitely don't need 9. You don't really need 7. 5 with that budget, we're going to be able to do a lot more with 5. For overheads, you don't need 6. You'd probably be fine with 2.
Or
exactly.
4.
4 is fine, right? Yeah.
Front. I mean, if like in a full blown theater, I'll do 4 Atmos speakers and 2 Atmos front height speakers because I do believe in that. I think that adds to it when we can, but it's room dependent.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want these people and all these, all these groups and forums and all that thinking that they have lesser product because they don't have 27 speakers around the room. That's just not true.
No, the other thing too is. Oh, go ahead, Gene.
The other thing too is people, they tend to look at these speaker diagrams like the Dolby diagrams and they hold it like a biblical source.
It's bullshit.
And it's bullshit because Don, we've installed so many systems where we put the tops plus or minus 20 to 30 degrees.
Your family room. How good does your family room sound?
And it shouldn't, right? Because our Atmos speakers are pretty wide apart.
What did I tell you from the beginning? You're going to be shocked how good this sounds.
Yeah. We created in my family room, we have 4 Atmos speakers that are a little bit wider apart than the mains. And then the surround speakers we couldn't put on the sidewalls. We put speakers that angle down towards the listener.
And you were worried about it.
And it's amazing. Like watching Stranger Things and someone's knocking on the door. You really think there's someone at my front door. All of us were watching.
Because there's a misconception that architectural speakers are lesser products. And they're really not in this modern day and age. There are architectural speakers. Matt, how architectural is your family room?
It's nothing but architectural. So I have I have DefTech in walls. They're like the LCR 6.5 or something like that for the left, center, right, and surround speakers. I've got in ceiling speakers for the overheads, and then 2 in wall subs from DefTech. And I mean, it's shocking.
You called me the other night. You're like, dude, this sounds amazing.
It's better than it should be, and it's better than I expected it to be. I mean, I typically had just been very anti-architectural speakers, and this is nothing that expensive. That's the thing. I think these are $599 a piece, so that's not a lot of money, relatively speaking. And the other thing I'll just mention though is I mean, Don, you've been in this industry a lot longer than me. 20 years ago, I think a lot of the architectural speakers weren't really all that great.
They sucked, but now you can get like the Focal 1000s or the Paradigms. I mean,
Perlisten has literally an S7T that's in the wall.
Yeah,
and it's just as expensive. It's not any cheaper, but the point is, it's the exact same drivers, same crossover. So you're getting. I mean,
the crossover is a little tweaked to compensate for being, but
same quality of parts though. Point is, not simplified.
Architectural speakers and his back speakers and all of his ceiling speakers and his reference. Listen, when we designed Gene's theater, it was a no holds barred. We just want to have the best of everything, right? I mean, we really had no limitations, Gene.
Yeah.
And how does it sound to you?
It's the best sound I've ever heard in my own systems for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I just don't want my biggest thing is that being a professional integrator and somebody who designs theater rooms, and I mean big, expensive, badass theater rooms. That's not all I do. I actually prefer dealing with a client who is not a gazillionaire and is really into it and just wants to get the best sound that they can for a certain amount of money. But it's crazy how good the sound you can get But you go on YouTube and imagine somebody first getting into this, and they're on this forum, or they're on this and they're on that, and everybody's just going bing, 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 bouncing them around, and you got to have this, and you got to be at this angle. I'm telling you,
you got to be at this angle.
Bullshit. There are certain things you can do to have incredible sound, but if you listen, and especially with YouTube, everybody's a freaking expert now. You know, they've been doing this for 3 years. They've heard 8 systems, and now they're going to influence you on what you should buy. Don't believe the hype. It's like Chuck D said, right, baby? Don't believe. I mean, seriously, you don't have to spend a gazillion dollars to get great sound. You just don't. And you don't need Auro 3D. You don't need the voice of God. You don't need a third layer, because it's all bullshit. You're just not going to take advantage of it.
Don is
I am passionate about it, because it's what I do for
speaking the truth
every single day. In fact, many of you,
he's having an Auro connection.
Well, Matt, am I wrong?
Look, I hope we're all wrong, and I hope in a year Auro comes back and they have a streaming platform that's cheaper.
That'd be cool. That'd be cool.
And they have music other than Mondo Dio, and we could all enjoy it and have competing formats. But I do want to throw one last argument out. I know we all like competition, right? Because we don't want a monopoly.
Sure.
So the argument is, if Dolby is the de facto standard, then there's no competition. They could do whatever they want. They could lower their quality and screw us. I don't think that's the case, because Dolby evolves their codecs based on the demand from the studios, right? If a studio wants certain things to happen, if they want to be able to mix certain sounds, they want to have the very best codec they can do to make that happen. So the consumer market is not driving the Dolby as much as
I beg for a new surround format that's going to change the game. And I think Matthew Poes is so dialed in, he's going to be the catalyst. I mean, well,
I know people doing cool work. I don't know that I'm going to be.
I want you guys to know out there, and I know Matt's kind of shy and he's really humble. But let me tell you something. That cat, Matthew Poes, is a freaking savant. He is a genius. And if something's going to come along, he's probably going to be a part of it. Seriously. I mean, the guy, he helps speaker companies design their speakers, acoustic companies design their acoustic treatments. I mean, he's working with me. I'm honored to have him as a friend, but I'm honored to have him as somebody who helps me design rooms with sound mitigation. I mean, he holistically looks at the sound in a room. And Matt has not one time to me said, you know, Don, we got to have a voice of God and a third layer of audio. Not one time ever has Matthew Poes done that. Yeah. And he's humble. I'm not so humble. I'm a big hillbilly. So,
and also Matt's a pretty awesome cook, man. He's been sending me pictures.
He's a great cook. But listen, I just don't want people who are getting into this hobby, that's my passion, it's all of our passion, to get in it and think that they have lesser systems because they don't have what some douchebag on YouTube who's, you know, never got into business 3 years ago is going to tell you what you got to have because he read it on the internet. I'm just telling you, don't believe the hype.
And you know what? If you like Auro, that's great. We're not bashing anybody.
I like Auro.
Is
that right? Auro 3D.
Hey, all of my systems, except for my Anthem, have Auro 3D.
9 of your systems?
Yeah, just don't really use it. I mean,
for those of you who are wondering why
he's got audio in his garage, like really good.
In my bathroom too.
For those of you who are wondering why we were like 10 minutes late getting started, it's because we couldn't get Don to stop saying oral.
Oral. Hey, every time I go to Vegas, I like Auro 3D.
Look, bottom line, if you're buying a new AVR, don't let the Auro, whether or not it has Auro, be a deciding factor. Because Anthem, for example, is making some incredible processors and receivers. They don't have Auro. And you know what? I don't miss it. I really enjoy I have the MRX 1140 in my bedroom system. That system sounds amazing.
Hey, and any of you out there have theaters for $2,200, I'll come do a video on them.
There you go.
I didn't know where that was going at first.
I didn't know either. Well, I think that's a wrap, Matt. I appreciate you putting that together for us, and I hope Auro figures their path towards.
It'd be cool. I hope
they do something innovative. We always want innovation, so maybe they'll do something next with real 3D sound. Who knows? And I'm here to be proven wrong. You know, years ago I said we're never going to see anything beyond Dolby True HD, and then 6 months later we had Atmos.
Hey, focus on the quality of your speakers, the quality of your processor. and the quality of your amplification. And if you can't do a 27.9.4, no, you'll be fine. Trust me.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that's a wrap. Appreciate Sean. You were all you did was talk, man. This whole
So Sean's my protege. I am teaching him the ways of the dark side.
So the ways of the dark side, yeah. But I've been installing this stuff since I was a teenager. In Auro 3D, the times I've come across it is so minuscule that I'm just not an expert on this topic, just like most people aren't. So it's really not that important. And everything this man said is very true when it comes to your home audio.
So tomorrow we're heading to Miami to hook up with Focal on one of their new stores. We're pretty excited about that. We're going to hear the Grand Utopias and all the name stuff. And
I wonder if they're are they a little bit bright?
They're a little bright.
They're a little bit bright.
Listen, just so you know, my other favorite channel and all of YouTube is Spare Change. I love Shane. He's really cool.
He's a good guy.
Just ask him.
I call him loose change, not spare change.
But his assessment of the Focals is just bullshit. Just absolute bullshit.
I love Focals.
I mean, sometimes they're a little bit bright.
They are a little bit bright.
Sometimes they're a little bright. Maybe I'm just holding that bad hearing.
Well, that's
we love you guys. Listen, we do love you, every one of you, even the trolls, mostly.
All right. Well, that's a wrap, guys. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to us if you want to suggest video topics or ask questions. Make sure you subscribe, hit that thumb up. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.